The moment I drove up to my barn that morning, I knew something was wrong. My gut sank as I saw the shiny silver padlock glinting in the sunlight, right on my barn door, and hanging there like a badge of unnecessary authority was a note from HOA Karen. She had locked me out. Me, the person who had paid every dime, followed every rule, and spent countless hours maintaining this land. And now, apparently, she had the audacity to decide I wasn't allowed to access my own property. I took a deep breath and read her note. It was dripping with entitlement. Property violations must be corrected immediately. Access denied until further notice. HOA Karen. Just like that, she thought she could play sheriff and turn my ranch into her personal playground. My first instinct was anger. Real. Teeth clenching. Red-hot fury. But anger alone wasn't going to get my livestock fed or my barn back in working order. No, this was a problem that needed a solution, and I had just the thing. I walked around the perimeter of the barn, checking for weaknesses, gaps, anything that might give me a way in without escalating things further. But the lock was solid, and Karen had clearly put effort into making sure I couldn't just pick it. I knew one thing for sure. Patience wouldn't win this fight. The cattle needed water, the horses needed feed, and my sanity was already fraying under the weight of her brazen interference. I glanced at my tractor parked nearby, dusted in morning dew and practically begging for action. That's when the plan hit me. Karen had tried to take control over my land, but she didn't own the ground, the barn, or the animals. If words and polite requests wouldn't work, then it was time to bring in the big guns. Literally, my tractor had been more than a workhorse. It had been my ally through tough seasons, flooded fields, and stubborn fences, and today it would be the instrument of reclaiming what was mine. I revved the engine slowly, feeling the vibration under my boots. Every muscle in my body was tense with anticipation. The barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was the heart of my ranch, and Karen's lock was a symbol of her overreach. With one slow pull, I shifted gears, positioning the tractor just right. Every second felt like a countdown, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. This was about more than a barn door. It was about standing my ground and proving that no overbearing HOA president was going to bully a rancher off his own land. The tractor lurched forward, tires gripping the earth, and I felt the raw power of my plan coming to life. The metal teeth of the front loader met the padlock, and for a brief moment, everything hung in suspense. And then, metal screeched, wood cracked, and the lock gave way under the force. My barn door, my sanctuary, was free again. Karen's little stunt had underestimated one thing: a rancher who knows his land and his machine. Just when I thought reclaiming my barn would be the end of Karen's antics, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel behind me. I turned, and there it was, her oversized Hummer, looming like a tank across my driveway. Karen herself was behind the wheel, arms crossed, glaring like she owned the entire county. She parked directly in front of my gate, blocking any chance I had of moving my tractor out or tending to the livestock. The nerve of this woman. I stepped out, hands on my hips, trying to reason with her. Karen, this is my property. You can't just block my gate like this. She smirked, the kind of smirk that screams, I'm untouchable, and replied, rules are rules. You'll get fined. If you move that tractor before. The HOA says it's okay. My blood boiled. Fines, threats, all while she sat comfortably in her giant vehicle like a queen on a throne? Unacceptable. I went back to my tractor, eyeing it like a trusty warhorse. I knew I couldn't just sit there. Karen's Hummer was a literal barricade. My mind raced, thinking of ways to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Then I remembered every time she had tried to intimidate other neighbors. All the complaints she'd filed. The unnecessary fines, the relentless emails. She thrived on control, but she hadn't met me yet. Not really. I fired up the tractor again, feeling its raw power beneath me. Slowly, deliberately, I inched closer, making sure to keep the engine's roar steady. No sudden moves. Karen's eyes narrowed, probably thinking I was hesitating. But I wasn't. I was planning the perfect lesson in don't mess with my ranch. As I aligned the tractor with her Hummer, I could see the panic flicker across her face. She knew deep down that her armored ego wasn't going to protect her from the reality of physics. The front loader raised just slightly, enough to make a subtle but unmistakable warning. Move your vehicle, Karen, I called out, or I'll make sure it finds itself somewhere else. Her hands trembled on the wheel, though she tried to hide it. This was the moment, patience versus arrogance. And Karen's arrogance had a tendency to overestimate her power. With one smooth maneuver, I nudged the Hummer from the front bumper. Tires screeched, metal protested, and gravity did the rest. Slowly, deliberately, it slid across the gravel and, plop, landed in the ditch at the side of the driveway. Karen screamed, of course. She clutched the wheel like it was her lifeline, But the Hummer wasn't going anywhere. I shut off the tractor, the engine's growl fading into the morning quiet. She glared, sputtered, and muttered threats, but I only shook my head. This was my property, my land, and my rules. One thing was crystal clear. Karen had underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. After the Hummer ended up in the ditch, I thought the worst of Karen's drama was behind me. But she wasn't the type to back down quietly. By mid-afternoon, I spotted her pacing along the edge of my property, phone glued to her ear, gesturing wildly. Whatever plan she was hatching, I knew it wouldn't be pleasant. Hey, Karen never did anything small or subtle. Everything she did came with a flair for chaos. I went back to check on the livestock, making sure everyone was calm after the morning's excitement. The cattle were grazing peacefully, oblivious to the battle unfolding just yards away. But Karen's presence was toxic, like a shadow over my ranch. I caught snippets of her conversation. Yes, they're trespassing. I need the authorities here immediately. She was calling in reinforcements, certain that her version of law and order would intimidate me into submission. I smiled quietly to myself. She had no idea what she was walking into. I had spent decades on this ranch, learning every inch of terrain, every weak spot in the fences, and every shortcut that could give me an edge. Karen might have rules and authority, but she didn't have experience or instincts honed by years of managing this land. And today, those instincts were going to save me from a nightmare that could have spiraled out of control. As she continued to bark orders into her phone, I decided it was time to turn the tables. I backed the tractor into position again, this time preparing for a demonstration she wouldn't forget. I didn't want anyone hurt, just a clear lesson about boundaries. Slowly, I rolled forward, lifting the front loader slightly, letting the sheer presence of my machine send a message. This is my land. My rules and my patience has limits. Karen froze mid-sentence, staring as the tractor approached. This isn't a joke, she yelled, but her voice lacked conviction. She realized that no amount of calls to authorities or threats could override the reality before her. The tractor was steady, controlled, and powerful, a perfect reflection of my resolve. I didn't touch her vehicle this time, but the sight alone was enough to make her think twice. Then, out of nowhere, she tried one final stunt. She sprinted toward the gate, hoping to lock it again before I could act. But I was ready. With precise timing, I maneuvered the tractor to gently but firmly block her path. She stumbled to a halt, momentarily shocked by how quickly her plan had failed. And in that moment, I realized something vital. Karen's obsession with control was her weakness. The more she tried to escalate, the easier it was for me to defend my ground. Her face was a mixture of fury and disbelief, the kind that comes only when someone finally realizes they've underestimated you. This wasn't over. Of course, Karen never let things rest. But one thing was crystal clear. She wasn't walking all over my ranch today, or any day. By now, word of Karen's antics had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. I could see curious neighbors peeking over fences, phones in hand, probably recording the spectacle of HOA Karen, furious and red-faced, trying and failing to assert authority over my ranch. It was almost surreal. A woman who prided herself on control had become the laughingstock of the very community she thought she dominated. I went back to the barn, checking on the livestock and ensuring the fences held steady. The cattle and horses had calmed down completely, a stark contrast to the chaos Karen had tried to unleash. Every sound of their grazing felt like a reminder. This was my land, and no overbearing HOA president was going to take it from me. The tractor, now parked strategically near the gate, stood as a silent guardian, a symbol of the day's events and a warning to anyone else who might think they could interfere. Karen, of course, wasn't done. She stomped up to me, pointing a finger and yelling, "You can't do this! I'm calling the cops again!" I shook my head, suppressing a smirk. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "But the cops already know whose side reality is on. You don't get to bully people off their property. This barn, this land, and these animals belong to me. And you, Karen, are not in charge here." Her face turned bright red, and I could see her calculating next moves. But every attempt she made to intimidate me had already backfired. Her threats had become entertainment, her authority meaningless, and her Hummer was still stuck in the ditch, a perfect metaphor for her overreach. The longer she lingered, the more ridiculous she looked, and the neighbors were silently cheering from their yards. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of triumph settle in. Today wasn't just about freeing a barn door or moving a stubborn vehicle. It was about standing up for yourself, defending what's yours, and proving that arrogance has limits when faced with experience, patience, and a little ingenuity. Karen might come back with paperwork or another plan, but one thing was clear. She would never underestimate me again. Finally, she stormed off, muttering threats into her phone, but I didn't bother watching. The ranch was calm, the livestock content, and the tractor gleamed in the afternoon sun like a silent sentinel. The gate was open, the barn secure, and my boundaries reinforced, not just with wood and metal, but with a statement: I run this land, not an overbearing HOA president. As I walked through the pasture, listening to the quiet sounds of my animals, I felt an unshakable sense of pride. The day had tested patience, strategy, and nerve, but it ended exactly as it should. With the ranch intact, the barn unlocked, and Karen humbled in the most satisfying way. My land, my rules, my victory. Thanks for watching this wild ranch showdown. If you loved seeing me take on HOA Karen, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next crazy story. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if Karen blocked your gate? I want to hear your thoughts.